But you, Ruby, and...
This is an NBC News special report. Here's Lester Holt.
Good day. We're coming on the air because President Biden is about to make a major announcement that the U.S. will withdraw all of its remaining troops, some 2,500 from Afghanistan by September 11th. Here's the president.
In October of 2001, President George W. Bush informed our nation that the United States military had begun strikes on terrorist training camps in Afghanistan. It was just weeks after the terrorist attack on our nation that killed 2,977 innocent souls, that turned Lower Manhattan into a disaster area, destroyed parts of the Pentagon, and made hallowed ground of a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and sparked an American promise that we would never forget. We went to Afghanistan in 2001 to root out al-Qaeda, to prevent future terrorist attacks against the United States planned from Afghanistan. Our objective was clear. The cause was just. Our NATO allies and partners rallied beside us. And I supported that military action along with overwhelming majority of the members of Congress. More than 7 years later, in 2008, weeks before we swore the oath of office President Obama and I were about to swear, President Obama asked me to travel to Afghanistan and report back on the state of the war in Afghanistan. I flew to Afghanistan, to the Kunar Valley, a rugged mountainous region on the border with Pakistan. What I saw on that trip reinforced my conviction that only the Afghans have the right and responsibility to lead their country, and that more and endless American military force could not create or sustain a durable Afghan government. I believed that our presence in Afghanistan should be focused on the reason we went in the first place, to ensure Afghanistan would not be used as a base from which to attack our homeland again. We did that. We accomplished that objective. I said, among with others, we'd follow Osama bin Laden to the gates of hell if need be. That's exactly what we did, and we got him. It took us close to 10 years to put President Obama's commitment into form, and that's exactly what happened. Osama bin Laden was gone. That was 10 years ago. Think about that. We delivered justice to bin Laden a decade ago, and we've stayed in Afghanistan for a decade since. Since then, our reasons for remaining in Afghanistan have become increasingly unclear, even as the terrorist threat that we went to fight evolved. Over the past 20 years, the threat has become more dispersed, metastasizing around the globe. Al-Shabaab in Somalia, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, al-Nusra in Syria, ISIS attempting to create a caliphate in Syria and Iraq, and establishing affiliates in multiple countries in Africa and Asia. With the terror threat now in many places, keeping thousands of troops grounded and concentrated in just one country at a cost of billions each year makes little sense to me and to our leaders. We cannot continue the cycle of extending or expanding our military presence in Afghanistan, hoping to create ideal conditions for the withdrawal and expecting a different result. I'm now the 4th United States president to preside over American troop presence in Afghanistan. 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. I will not pass this responsibility on to a 5th. After consulting closely with our allies and partners, with our military leaders and intelligence personnel, with our diplomats and our development experts, with the Congress and the Vice President, as well as with Mr. Ghani and many others around the world, I've concluded that it's time to end America's longest war. It's time for American troops to come home. When I came to office, I inherited a diplomatic agreement duly negotiated between the government of the United States and the Taliban that all U.S. forces would be out of Afghanistan by May 1, 2021, just 3 months after my inauguration. That's what we inherited, that commitment. It's perhaps not what I would have negotiated myself, but it was an agreement made by the United States government, and that means something. So in keeping with that agreement and with our national interest, the United States will begin our final withdrawal, begin it on May 1 of this year. We'll not conduct a hasty rush to the exit. We'll do it responsibly, deliberately, and safely. And we will do it in full coordination with our allies and partners, who now have more forces in Afghanistan than we do. And the Taliban should know that if they attack us as we draw down, we will defend ourselves and our partners with all the tools at our disposal. Our allies and partners have stood beside us, shoulder to shoulder in Afghanistan for almost 20 years, and we're deeply grateful for the contributions they have made to our shared mission and for the sacrifices they've borne. The plan has long been in together, out together. U.S. troops, as well as forces deployed by our NATO allies and operational partners, will be out of Afghanistan before we mark the 20th anniversary of that heinous attack on September 11th. But we'll not take our eye off the terrorist threat. We'll reorganize our counterterrorism capabilities and the substantial assets in the region to prevent reemergence of terrorists with a threat to our homeland from over the horizon. We'll hold the Taliban accountable for its commitment not to allow any terrorist to threaten the United States or its allies from Afghan soil. The Afghan government has made that commitment to us as well, and will focus our full attention on the threat we face today. In my direction, my team is refining our national strategy to monitor and disrupt significant terrorist threats, not only in Afghanistan, but anywhere they may arise, and they're in Africa, Europe, the Middle East, and elsewhere. I spoke yesterday with President Bush to inform him of my decision. While he and I have had many disagreements over policy throughout the years, we're absolutely united in our respect and support for the valor, courage, and integrity of the women and men of the United States Armed Forces who served. I'm immensely grateful for the bravery and backbone that they have shown through nearly 2 decades of combat deployments. We as a nation are forever indebted to them and to their families. You all know that less than 1% of Americans serve in our armed forces. The remaining 99% of them, we owe them. We owe them. They've never backed down from a single mission that we've asked of them. I've witnessed their bravery firsthand during my visits to Afghanistan. They've never wavered in their resolve. They've paid a tremendous price on our behalf. And they have the thanks of a grateful nation. While we'll not stay involved in Afghanistan militarily, our diplomatic and humanitarian work will continue. We'll continue to support the government of Afghanistan. We will keep providing assistance to the Afghan national defenses and security forces. And along with our partners, we have trained and equipped a standing force of over 300,000 Afghan personnel today, and hundreds of thousands over the past 2 decades. And they'll continue to fight valiantly on behalf of the Afghans at great cost. They'll support peace talks, as we will support peace talks between the government of Afghanistan and the Taliban facilitated by the United Nations. And will continue to support the rights of Afghan women and girls by maintaining significant humanitarian and development assistance. And we'll ask other countries in the region to do more to support Afghanistan, especially Pakistan, as well as Russia, China, India, and Turkey. They all have a significant stake in the stable future for Afghanistan. And over the next few months, we'll also determine what a continued U.S. diplomatic presence in Afghanistan will look like, including how we'll ensure the security of our diplomats. Now, look, I know there are many who will loudly insist that diplomacy cannot succeed without a robust U.S. military presence to stand as leverage. We gave that argument a decade. It's never proved effective. Not when we had 98,000 troops in Afghanistan, and not when we were down to a few thousand. Our diplomacy does not hinge on having boots in harm's way, U.S. boots on the ground. We have to change that thinking. American troops shouldn't be used as a bargaining chip between warring parties in other countries. You know, that's nothing more than a recipe for keeping American troops in Afghanistan indefinitely. I also know there are many who will argue that we should stay fighting in Afghanistan because withdrawal would damage America's credibility and weaken America's influence in the world. I believe the exact opposite is true. We went to Afghanistan because of a horrific attack that happened 20 years ago. That cannot explain why we should remain there in 2021. Rather than return to war with the Taliban, we have to focus on the challenges that are in front of us. We have to track and disrupt terrorist networks and operations that spread far beyond Afghanistan since 9/11. We have to shore up American competitiveness to meet the stiff competition we're facing from an increasingly assertive China. We have to strengthen our alliances and work with like-minded partners to ensure that the rules of international norms that govern cyber threats and emerging technologies that will shape our future are grounded in our democratic values, not those of the autocrats. We have to defeat this pandemic and strengthen the global health system to prepare for the next one, because there will be another pandemic. You know, we'll be much more formidable to our adversaries and competitors over the long term if we fight the battles for the next 20 years, not the last 20. And finally, the main argument for staying longer is what each of my three predecessors have grappled with. No one wants to say that we should be in Afghanistan forever, but they insist now is not the right moment to leave. In 2014, NATO issued a declaration affirming that Afghan security forces would from that point on have full responsibility for this country's security by the end of that year. That was 7 years ago. So when will it be the right moment to leave? 1 more year? 2 more years? 10 more years? 10, 20, $30 billion more than the $1 trillion we've already spent? Not now? That's how we got here. And in this moment, there's a significant downside risk to staying beyond May 1st without a clear timetable for departure. If we instead pursue the approach where U.S. exit is tied to conditions on the ground, we have to have clear answers to the following questions. Just what conditions be required to allow us to depart? By what means and how long would it take to achieve them, if they could be achieved at all? And at what additional cost in lives and treasure? I've not heard any good answers to these questions. And if you can't answer them, in my view, we should not stay. The fact is that later today, I'm going to visit Arlington National Cemetery, Section 60. In that sacred memorial to American sacrifice, Section 60 is where our recent war dead are buried, including many of the women and men who died fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq. There's no comforting distance in history in Section 60. The grief is raw. It's a visceral reminder of the living cost of war. For the past 12 years, ever since I became vice president, I've carried with me a card that reminds me of the exact number of American troops killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. That exact number, not an approximation or rounded off number, because every one of those dead are sacred human beings who left behind entire families. An exact accounting of every single solitary one needs to be had. As of today, there are 2,488 U.S. troops and personnel who have died in Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Freedom's Sentinel, our Afghanistan conflicts. 20,722 have been wounded. I'm the first president in 40 years who knows what it means to have a child serving in a war zone. And throughout this process, my North Star has been remembering what it was like when my late son Bo was deployed to Iraq. How proud he was to serve his country, how insistent he was to deploy with his unit, and the impact it had on him and all of us at home. We already have service members doing their duty in Afghanistan today whose parents served in the same war. We have service members who are not yet born when our nation was attacked on 9/11. War in Afghanistan was never meant to be a multi-generational undertaking. We were attacked. We went to war with clear goals. We achieved those objectives. Bin Laden is dead, and Al-Qaeda is degraded in Iraq, in Afghanistan. And it's time to end the forever war. Thank you all for listening. May God protect our troops. May God bless all those families who lost someone in this endeavor.
President Biden in the treaty room of the White House essentially saying he can no longer make a case to keep American troops in Afghanistan and setting a timetable to bring all home by September 11th of this year, 20 years after the attack on New York and Pennsylvania and Washington. Let me bring in Chief White House Correspondent Peter Alexander now. Peter, lay out the logistics and what happens next.
Yeah, Lester, this is a historic development, this announcement, one that past presidents have aimed for. President Trump had set a goal of trying to get all American troops out of Afghanistan, but one that this president says he will oversee. The bottom line that you heard from him today is that if they wait for the conditions to be ideal, that's the recipe for American troops to stay in Afghanistan forever, which is why in the near future, in the next several weeks, American troops, the remaining 2,000 to 3,000 troops still in that region, will begin coming home with the expectation they will all have left Afghanistan before 9/11, which would of course mark the 20-year anniversary of the beginning of the Afghanistan of the 9/11 attacks, but also that war in Afghanistan. The treaty room today was symbolic. That's exactly where President Bush delivered the remarks about the start of that war 20 years ago. Of course, there is criticism, some of it bipartisan. Republicans like Mitch McConnell calling this decision a grave mistake. Lindsey Graham, the Republican, saying that this is paving the way for another 9/11. Some Democrats also critical of the move, but Joe Biden says that there are greater threats elsewhere, and that's where the U.S. attention should be at this time, focusing not exclusively on Afghanistan, but the counterterrorism threats across the globe and other issues that America has to deal with on a foreign policy basis, including Russia and China. Lester?
All right, Peter, thank you. And with us as well, Chief Washington Correspondent Andrea Mitchell and Chief Foreign Correspondent Richard Engel. Andrea, let me start with you. There's a term we've all heard before, mission creep, where you go in with one mission and it becomes and morphs into something else. Is essentially that what we're looking at today?
Absolutely. It's mission creep over 20 years, according to the president's diagnosis today. He just said bin Laden is dead and Al-Qaeda is degraded in Afghanistan and the forever wars are over. That said, of course, there's no interim peace agreement. The Taliban have said they're not going to negotiate until all U.S. troops are out. There's no guarantee, no constitutional guarantee in Afghanistan once the U.S. leaves, that all of the rights that have been won, the rights particularly for women. When I first went there in 1998, women were basically enslaved. And now they're members of parliament by quota, guaranteed by bipartisan Bush and Obama conditions that were set. So there's a lot that has not been done. But the fact is that a lot was accomplished, and what they're saying now is we can't stay forever. And as Peter just said, there's bipartisan criticism and praise for this. Jeanne Shaheen, the senator from New Hampshire on armed services, very critical. So you're hearing from both sides, but I think the president believes that there's no point in continuing this because they can't achieve the goals that were set out beyond getting bin Laden and stopping terrorism. By the way, also today, the intelligence communities, all 17 agencies contributing to a report that said that China is now our biggest threat, not Al-Qaeda, and this to the Senate Intelligence Committee. So that is the assessment of the world threats that need to be dealt with, pandemics and a lot of other things, but not Afghanistan.
And Richard, I think it's fair to say you've spent far more time in Afghanistan than most of us on combat deployments and following troops. I'm just curious how you process this now as we see the apparent end of the road in Afghanistan.
Well, it is the end of an era, and the Taliban see this as a tremendous victory, and that's where we're seeing the biggest reaction so far from Afghans themselves. The Taliban, and I've spoken to their leaders, believe that Afghan guerrilla fighters pushed out in the 19th century the greatest power in the world, the British Empire, and then at the height of the Cold War they pushed out the Soviet Union, and now they will soon be seeing the backs of American forces while the Taliban, remain. So they see this as a historic victory. Afghan people are very nervous. Over the last 20 years, while American troops have been in this country, or been in that country, the country has progressed tremendously. Life expectancies have altered people's lives. Medical care has changed. Access to school, particularly for women, has been revolutionary. And people there now have access to the internet, access to mobile phones, and they don't want to go back living in the Stone Ages, which is what it was like under the Taliban. And then finally, the Afghan government. The Afghan government could collapse. The Afghan government has become incredibly dependent on the United States military, on American money. So there is a possibility the country could go into some sort of civil war. But are Americans going to stay there forever? This does put a bookend on the 9/11 era.
Richard, thank you. Also with us, NBC News political director and moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd. Chuck, Andrea noted there's going to be some opposition to this. Was there a political imperative to do this now?
I wouldn't call it a political imperative. Obviously, you know, and President Biden made sure folks knew it wasn't he who set the terms of this deal. It was President Trump that created the terms of this deal. It was interesting to me that he wanted to emphasize that when America makes a deal, they stick by it regardless of who's the president, which is an interesting decision specifically here, and certainly could have ramifications for some other policies that President Biden may be reviewing. But you know, it is worth noting that in many ways, Joe Biden's view on how to handle Afghanistan, he would have made this, had he been president in 2013, I think he would have made this decision and had done this. He had long advocated for figuring out a way to get out, and so now he's the guy calling the shots. The opportunity was there, the deadline was there. But keep something else in mind, and this has been the issue with Afghanistan for a long time. All of the critics are in the sort of, you know, the think tank world, newspaper editorial pages, and elected officials. The public, this is an extraordinarily popular political decision, which is get out of Afghanistan. So I don't think this is going to be a political problem for him. If anything, staying is what was the could have been a political problem. But the country was ready to get out years ago. All
right, Chuck Todd. Chuck, thank you. We'll have much more on President Biden's announcement to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan tonight when I see you for NBC Nightly News. I'm Lester Holt in New York. Thank you for joining us. Good day.
We now join our regularly scheduled program already in progress.
Okay, Orchestra, it's available wherever you get your music. We'll be